Hello everybody, welcome back to Wisconsin Wonder Garden. A couple of days ago we bought all of the seeds that we'll need for our vegetable crops this year, and now's the time that we're going to start germinating some of the seeds indoors, and a couple of the seeds are going to be planted outdoors as well, directly in the garden. And today's video is going to be all about that. What sort of seeds are you going to germinate? When? And where are you going to germinate those seeds? A lot of people just aren't sure when to germinate them to make sure that you have the best harvest as possible, that your timing is optimum. Obviously, if you germinate your seeds too early, you're going to have the plants are going to be wanting more than they're receiving indoors. They're not going to have the right temperature, they're not going to have the right light. Yes, you can grow vegetables indoors, but in most cases, if you have germinated seeds growing for too long indoors, you're not going to have as healthy of a plant as possible. And the same thing goes towards the flip side of that. If it's too long and we've waited way past our specific point to germinate those seeds, they're just not going to be harvested in the time that they should be. Whether our constrictions there would be like temperature, like it might be getting too hot outside for them to set the fruit that they want to, or it might even get too close to the fall frost date. But either way, we get about 160, 170 growing days in Wisconsin here. So most likely you will be okay. You will get a harvest. It's not that this is do or die. Most of the time you can be a week or two or even 3 late or early, and you'll be able to make do with it. But the more accurate we can be, the better our harvest is going to be. I always recommend experimenting and having fun with your plants, but when starting your seedlings out, it definitely does help your harvest out if you do them at the right time. So I've got a couple of different resources for you guys to check out. There's some great, the first thing that we need to do is figure out when our last frost date is going to be. You can find that on the Farmer's Almanac. Just type in Almanac, Farmer's Almanac frost date, last frost date. And you'll be able to type in your specific area code, which will then relay information based off of the weather towers in your area that will give you an average last frost date. They also have this for the first frost date in the fall, which is important for fall crops, but when growing spring crops, you want to know when that last frost date is going to be. From that point, you've got to figure out what your planting calendar and schedule is going to be. The Farmer's Almanac has some resources on that we're going to talk about later, but I've made a really quick and easy guide for you guys for some of the most common vegetables that are grown in the garden on when you need to sow them and germinate them. Some are in a group of 4 to 5 weeks, and then we do a 2 to 3 week group, and then there's also a group of seeds that are to be sown directly into the garden. Now, the reason why you want to sow some of these directly in the garden is, one, they're more cold hardy crops that can withstand the colder weathers. So you don't have to germinate them inside. You can just plant them early enough in the season outdoors and they'll do great. The main thing that you're looking at for the other side of plants and vegetables that can be sown in or outdoors, is root crops. You also do not want to plant most root crops. At least I really don't recommend it, because if you think about it, the vegetable, the actual meat of that vegetable is the root itself. So I don't want to start growing them indoors and then have to transplant them and risk damaging that root in the process. You're going to be much better off, even if it takes a little bit longer for your harvest, just to sow them directly into your garden. You'll have much better results this way. So let's take a look at the schedule that I've made for you guys. Make sure you do hop on Farmer's Almanac to find your last frost date, and then you're going to go off of this schedule here on how many weeks ahead of that frost date you're going to want to germinate indoors. All right, here's the planting schedule that I put together for you guys. This is in 3 different groups. We have the 4 to 5 week group, the 2 to 3 week group, and the direct sow group. Again, this time is going to be before your last frost date. So use that Farmer's Almanac to find your last frost date, and then go back either 2 to 3 weeks or 4 to 5 weeks for these. There is also some vegetables that require more than 5 weeks, like 6, 7, sometimes even 8 weeks at the max. But these I didn't put on here because nobody wants these things growing for 8 weeks in their basement or up on top of their fridge. You just, you have more and more risk as time goes on that those seedlings are going to struggle and not be as healthy as possible. So for these plants, I just recommend buying them as seedlings, and that's why I didn't put them on this list. So first off, we have this 4 to 5 week group. The reason why these are 4 to 5 weeks are that they take longer, and the plant itself needs to be of larger size before we're gonna put it outside and subject it to the weather. These are going to be basil, celery, eggplants, onions, parsley, peppers, and tomatoes. As we all know, peppers and tomatoes especially take a long time to grow, which is why these definitely need to be planted here at 4 to 5 weeks. And I'll tell you about these onions and spinach in a little bit, but here are everything that are 4 to 5 weeks. There are some varieties of peppers that need even longer to be strong enough to be outside. But make sure that you guys are reading the back of your seed packages when growing too. So if you see some variety that does not match up with these time frames, that's just based off of that specific variety. So that may vary a little bit, but generally you're always going to be okay with these time frames right here. So moving on to 2 to 3 weeks, we have broccoli, cabbage, cucumbers, lettuce, spinach, squash, and watermelon. Now again, these are 2 to 3 weeks because they're a little bit faster growing, and they might be also more cold or less cold tolerant than the previous group. And then moving on, we have the direct sow. These are going to be your beans, beets, carrots, corn, peas, potatoes, and radishes, as well as any other root crop. Like I said earlier in the video, you want to make sure you get your root crops, direct sow them. Now, the time that you direct sow these can be different as well, which I will talk about very soon. After we go through this, I'll talk to you about the direct sow stuff and how you can know exactly when to plant all of these as well. Before we get to that, let's talk about the spinach and onions. These here I have highlighted because those two can also be direct sown without any negative side effects, as long as you don't plant them out of their calendar range. Like you're not planting the spinach 4 weeks before your frost date. Make sure that these are still within the range. Preferably, I would recommend checking out this calendar that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And the same thing with the onions. You can plant these outdoors, but make sure you're planting them at the right time. So another great resource that I'd love to show you guys besides this calendar here is on the Farmer's Almanac. And that's going to give you some dates for most of these vegetables and a couple of other ones too. So let's go and talk about that one. If you guys have any questions on this, please make sure you leave a comment down below, and I'll be sure to get to your guys' questions and answer them as accurately as possible. If you do have any questions, make sure you let me know what agricultural zone you're in, and maybe even, if possible, if you don't mind, like what city. That way I can answer your questions accurately. Let's go and talk about this other resource, the Farmer's Almanac Calendar. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's a really nice and easy schedule that you can follow as long as you have your last frost date. Another great resource that I highly recommend is the Farmer's Almanac Planting Calendar. This is so useful to the point where I recommend printing it off and having that on your wall in your garden shed or wherever you've got all your gardening supplies, so that way it's something that you're looking at often, and after a while you guys will you'll know instinctually when you need to plant what. Beginner gardeners, this is going to take a while to catch up on, but as you're working with the plants over and over again, year after year, you start to understand which plants can be grown when. But if you don't know that, even for people like me, and because I have a hard time remembering exactly when everything's supposed to be put where, especially when you work with so many different varieties of vegetables, it can be hard, which is why I print that out, and I make sure I look at that every single year so I know when I'm putting my plants in, if I am germinating by seed. If you're growing by seedling, you can usually just put them right into the ground once the seedlings are available, because most nurseries do understand that they're not going to want to be stocking vegetables and plants that can't be put into the ground, because they're going to get a lot of negative feedback with people that just don't know how to garden correctly. So if you're growing seedlings from the nursery, you can go ahead and put those right into the soil. But otherwise, I've just found that it's really helpful to have that growing calendar, or that planting calendar, printed off. And this also goes by your zip code, which is really great because it's super accurate. I think it has like a 10-day variance or so, something like that, give or take. But most of these plants are going to be able to withstand a some variance in it. It's not going to be do or die. It doesn't have to be exact, but you're going to be a little bit better off being later than way too early as far as transplanting in the garden and everything. So just take a look at that calendar. It's a great resource. I hope you found all this information helpful. I try to get this out early for you guys because I know all across the country people have already started germinating their seeds, getting them growing indoors, which is one of the videos that is coming up next. We're going to be germinating our seeds. We're going to show you how to grow them and germinate them both in soil, and then we're also going to do the fun method, which is paper towel. And you guys are going to figure out which one I recommend the most based off of my results. So thank you guys all so much for watching. Click this box right up here to move on to the next episode. Happy gardening.